1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. We've got a great show for you today. We've got Pete Kazanjy on the show. Pete is basically just a jack of many trades. So first of all, he founded a company called Talent and sold that business to Monster.com many years ago. He then created the community that a lot of folks in startup land know as something called MSP, which is Modern Sales Professionals. It is the largest email discussion group that I know of talking about sales operations in the world. And he's also the founder of a company called Atrium. And he's also the author of a book called Founding Sales. So the whole point is Pete has taken his experience building companies, but also the experience that was a requirement for him, which was learning how to do sales effectively. And he has indoctrinated that across a wide range of functions and content so that the rest of us can learn. So we talk in this episode about when you should hire your first salespeople, how you should think about scaling sales, and what are the things that you need to look for as you're trying to build and grow a business. And it's really, really interesting stuff. So we're excited to have Pete on the show. He's a well-known figure personality and, dare I say, friend. Now, before we get there, we want to thank our sponsors. We've got two sponsors today. The first is DocuSign. Every sales org feels the pressure to close deals faster. Take control with the DocuSign Agreement Cloud, a suite of tools that automate sales contracts and quotes, all in your CRM. Create custom contracts, get them signed, and pull data back into your opportunities. See why more than 500,000 businesses use DocuSign with a free trial and discount exclusively for Sales Hacker listeners. Go to go.docusign.com/saleshacker for more information. Second sponsor is Outreach. That's outreach.io, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach supports sales reps by enabling them to humanize communications at scale, from automating the soul-sucking manual work that eats up selling time to providing action-oriented tips on what communications are working best. Outreach has your back. Now, without further ado, let's listen to our interview with Pete Kazanjy. Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today we've got on the show a very special person, a very well-known person in startup land. We've got Pete Kazanjy on the show. Pete is the founder of a company called Talent that he sold to Monster.com. He also founded one of the leading sales communities out there a couple of years ago. It's called MSP, for short, Modern Sales Pros. So he's one of the most regarded and well-known voices in the space because he curates and manages this community that must be over 10,000 people at this point. He also is the founder of a company called Atrium, and he's also the founder of a not-for-profit called Tech for Campaigns that is deployed on behalf of Democratic candidates and giving them modern demand generation technology in order to help people run for office all over the country. Pete, did I miss anything?
You nailed it. Can I always have you be my hype man?
No. It depends. Maybe. I'm going to say maybe. Welcome to the show, Pete. We're happy to have you.
I am super stoked to be talking with you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being stoked. So let's start, for folks that may not be familiar with who you are. Let's just get a little bit of I gave the bio, but you tell us in your words kind of what you're doing right now and tell us a little bit about whatever initiative you think is kind of most interesting.
Yeah. So when I like to fancy myself kind of an accidental sales leader insofar as I'd done up until, 5 or 6 years ago, my background was primarily in product management and product marketing. And I kind of got into sales and revenue acquisition through necessity from, my last software company, Talent. And so it's been a really fantastic journey to learn all about modern go-to-market and then, both learn about it and then start being one of the forward voices in the community. I wrote a book on sales for founders called Founding Sales. You can find it at foundingsales.com. The entire book is on the website there. It's kind of like open source for any comers. And then I run a software company called Atrium that makes advanced sales performance analytics software for instrumenting rep performance. So as you can tell, I'm kind of like a one-trick pony, right? I'm all in on sales excellence.
That's awesome. And yeah, to your point, you made Founding Sales available for anybody that wants to read it. Let's get a little bit into your background and figure out how you became such a sales advocate. So walk us through the journey, particularly, from Talent. I mean, it's also good to know, frankly, where you're from, like where you grew up, some of that stuff, and also how you originally discovered this competency from product management and then becoming passionate about teaching the world sales.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Southern California, which is why I said I was stoked earlier. And so, that pops out here and there. And I got into tech through when I originally worked at a company called VMware back in the day. I worked in the product marketing organization, and I was the product marketer for a product called VMware Fusion. It lets you run Windows on a Mac. And it was kind of this small line of business within VMware that, because it was like such a small revenue driver, it didn't have a ton of resources. So it was kind of like a startup in a much larger organization, but it allowed me to wear many hats. And eventually I started my own software company called Talent Bin, which is a recruiting software company. The way to kind of think about it is like LinkedIn Recruiter for the whole internet. And so that was kind of the place where I started to realize the importance of revenue acquisition, because we were making a B2B product, and it turns out that people just don't buy things, especially new innovative technology. It has to be, delivered to them and persuaded and presented to them, and their objections have to be handled, and so on and so forth. And this was kind of a shocker to somebody who didn't know that at all, me. And that kind of started my journey from being, business generalist founder, to our first sales rep, to our first sales manager, and then our VP of sales. And then when we were acquired by Monster, our sales organization was around 20 people. And then I started leading new product sales at Monster, which had a 600-person sales organization. So it was a little bit of a change there. But all along the way, as I was kind of figuring out how to run a process excellence sales organization at Talent Bin, that's where I really started appreciating, sales as a process, and a process, a science of art, I suppose, right? That where it is something that can be instrumented, and it's something that is important for people to be process excellent about, but at the same time being executed by humans who are messy and prone to failure and what have you. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am today.
Wow. And so what, you mentioned that shock, which a lot of product visionaries, a lot of technical founders have, which is that things don't sell themselves. I guess, how did you go about learning how to do what you needed to do, how to bring the product to market? And what were some of the first steps? I think a lot of founders probably ask you, and a lot of questions are, I'm at a stage where I want to start scaling my sales organization. What are the first things that I need to do?
Yeah. Well, so I did it through a bunch of terrible trial and error, making a bunch of mistakes. But the good news is that there is a set of stepwise processes to go through. And so I think a lot of founders don't understand this, because they come from a product background, they come from a technical background, they haven't interfaced with sales all that terribly much, or if they have, it's kind of been through Hollywood representations of sales, or interfacing with like large sales organizations like a Salesforce or an Oracle or what have you. And so I think that the most important thing early on is that founders have to do the initial selling themselves, right? It's highly unreliable to rely on somebody. It's a high risk scenario to try to rely on somebody else to figure out the sales motion for you at the earliest stage. And a lot of people kind of screw their companies over by trying to do that, because for good or for bad, they're afraid of selling, right? And if you think about it, a lot of selling behaviors for salespeople, we're used to talking to people we've never met, all day long, every day. But if you try to think back into the day before you were a seller, that's actually a fairly uncommon behavior. Interfacing with like dozens and dozens and dozens of people you've never met before, potentially who are adversarial or don't want to necessarily be convinced of something. So obviously it's an uncomfortable behavior to start, but once you start, but you have to start it, right? Because just trying to hand it off to somebody else to figure it out for you is pretty untenable. And so that's something that very frequently kills organizations.
So the first piece of advice is, you can't outsource this. This is something that you have to do. At what point, how many people, if you're thinking about hiring a sales team, I'm sure you get this question a lot. When should I hire my first person? Should I hire two people? What is the sequencing from your perspective that companies should be thinking about, going from, product with no go-to-market organization up through, a 20-person sales team, let alone a 600-person sales team?
Yeah. I have this slide deck that I end up presenting a lot, and I think if you just Google like Peter Kazanjy, it was I presented it at David Scott's like revenue is 0 to 100 workshop or whatever. But essentially, it breaks down the steps where like the first thing that you're trying to do, Matrix Growth Academy. Sorry about that. So just Google Peter Kazanjy Matrix Growth Academy, and it has the presentation on there. And so I think the first step is you gotta sell it yourself, right? And then when you get to the point where it can be repeatedly sold, and depending on this, your particular sales motion, that might be a couple dozen customers, it might be 100 customers, or what have you. 100 in the case for a very low ASP, right, product. But once you know that you can repeatedly sell it, and you have that sales motion at least solved in the world, then the next stage is to demonstrate that somebody who is not you can also run that sales motion, right? And so usually the best way to approach that is, by adding a couple of sellers in order to prove that you can teach somebody else this essentially the sales motion that you have, this puzzle that you have, unpacked, and then demonstrate that somebody else can do it. And sometimes that takes a lot of time, right? Because as a founder, you are like wildly expert in the problem space, and then also obviously very passionate about your product, and probably pretty high output and high activity. And so, relying on somebody else to have that level of like product expertise or problem space expertise is probably not a scalable, a scalable strategy. So proving that an account executive or two account executives can sell this at least as reliably as you can oftentimes be a process unto itself, along with all the documentation and teaching and collateral associated therewith. So the upshot is that, once you sold yourself a couple dozen times, that's kind of the point at which to prove that somebody else who's not you can sell it. And all your efforts need to go into proving that, because that's the only way that you're going to scale out is, once you get those two incremental account executives to do that, that's now you're unlocking the ability to go to 10, to go to 50, to go to 100.
Are you of the school of thought that you should hire two people versus one so that you can compare as you're, sort of in this go-to-market discovery process?
I am of the opinion that you should hire two, but I think it's, and part of the benefit associated with that, of course, is that you can compare. But I think in general, like, you should know what the KPIs are of your sales motion, because you did it previously, like you were the previous rep. So you know how many ops you can handle at any given time. So if you have a really involved sales motion, like, gosh, who's like really complex, say you're a Marquette or Iterable or something like that, like really involved email sending platform, Martech. And so like, there's only so many of those ops that you can handle, because there's lots of stakeholders, there's, lots of implementation, maybe you're acting as a sales engineer. So you should know what those KPIs are that a rep should have, because you were that rep initially. So it's less about like comparing them and understanding, are they performing? Are they executing the precursor behaviors? And it's more that like, if you onboarding two people concurrently, it's actually not that much more work than just onboarding one person, because as you're training them, for example, like they can both sit in a room together with you, right? And they're both learning from you. Or, they can work with each other to do like objection handle or what have you. Right. And then moreover, if you're riding along on calls as like a solutions consultant or as a coach, it's highly unlikely that two people are going to have such stacked calendars that you're going to be having like calendaring collisions all the time. So what you can do is you can actually split your time and ride along on both of their different calls. So the upshot is that yes, hiring two is very helpful, but for reasons above and beyond just like, hey, we can compare these two people as well.
We all get inbounds from early stage founders, I think a lot. One of them, I'm just curious what your answer to this is. I think they struggle focusing on the first part, which is, just making the sales themselves. They struggle with turning a meeting where seems to be some kind of interest into a closed sale, What's the advice that you give people they're out there having conversations? They think that they're doing sales, they're not quite sure, and they want assistance on like, okay, so what do I do to make this a signed contract and tell people about it?
Right. How do you sell? Yeah. I mean, for sure, right? Because so in the chapter on founding sales, so founding sales is written in a linear fashion where it starts with the most basic things like, what is your product marketing narrative and what's your argument about, your solution? How do you identify your prospects that have your needs? So like prospecting, how do you engage with them? So an outreach and appointment setting. And then there's a demo, discovery, presentation, pitching chapter, and then there's like pipeline management and closing. And I think the whole thing, the confusion that founders oftentimes get is like what are you trying to do in a sale, right? Like what's the goal? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify somebody who has a business pain, because if they don't have a business pain, then like why are you talking to them that your solution solves, and then persuade them and demonstrate to them that your solution would actually resolve that business pain in such a way that like you deserve to capture some of the value that is being produced for them in the form of revenue, right? So bookings for your product, and that's a fair trade. And so it's a fairly logical progression. And so then the question is, okay, as a founder or like as somebody who's selling per se, have you identified pain? Have you validated that they have it? Have you validated that your solution fits that pain and resolves it? Do they agree with that and believe you because it's been demonstrated through either ROI or, the fact that they actually they see it, it's in front of them, it's doing the thing and it's making them happy. And then based on that, it's like, okay, cool. Well, we saw that you had this problem. We validated the magnitude of that problem. We are now resolving that. And here's the value and the cost savings or the incremental revenue that's coming as a result of that problem being resolved. And then my pricing is this, which is 1/5 of that, or 1/10 of that, or 1/3 of that, or what have you. If it seems like you should buy this, right? And so as long as you're progressing along that arc, that is constantly the goal. And so then of course what comes in the way, of course, is objections. I don't believe that the utility is here, or I do believe that the utility is here, but there's another thing, like I need some other stakeholder to participate. Okay, wonderful. So it sounds like we've demonstrated utility, but we just now need to get this other stakeholder to buy in as well. Wonderful. That's the next hurdle for us to surmount. And so just making sure that you're driving to that next step making sure that you're driving to that next step in order to complete the transaction is the thing that founders should really focus on. Always the next step towards that eventual goal of wonderful, like you should pay for this product as a result of the utility that's being delivered to you.
Absolutely. I think, and I think sometimes the purpose of like a sales methodology or like stages in a sales cycle is just to provide structure so that people can follow those steps in a logical way, the inevitable conclusion of which is hopefully a closed deal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. Like guardrails, right?
So walk through, like, you're doing all of these things at TalentBin. You're now managing a team of 20. You've learned all of these things. First, basically, what is selling? You then introduced a process. You've taught other people how to do it. Now you're at Monster and there's 600 people. What happened next in your career? And I'm specifically interested, let's give you an opportunity to pitch your software platform. What are the fundamental assumptions that underlie the creation of Atrium specifically?
Yeah. So I think the thing that was really illuminating to me at TalentBin as I got more and more reps was that, sales is about, a high quantity of high quality selling activity. So it's not dissimilar to a revenue factory, if you will, with SDRs doing certain behaviors that then result in the creation of opportunities, and account executives doing certain behaviors which progress those deals and opportunities down a pipeline and what have you. And what the insight was at TalentBin was that this was fully instrumentable. You could instrument this to ensure that sufficient quantity and quality of selling activity was happening. It just ended up being very difficult to do through hacking together reporting and workflows and what have you in Salesforce, and then of course having to habitually look at it, and then in order to detect, okay, cool, is there a shortfall? where is the shortfall coming from? Who is the shortfall coming from? What is the particular, improvement area for each rep? And the upshot is that so we solved that at TalentBit, and we had a very process excellent, analytically driven sales organization. And then when I got to Monster, it was really eye opening to me at how large sales organizations really struggle with visibility into the quantity and quality of the selling activity, which only gets worse and worse and worse the more humans you have, the more managerial layers that you have, et cetera, et cetera. So what the insight is that, or what the hypothesis is that you could do a much better job of instrumenting this quantity and quality of selling activity on an SDR by SDR, AE by AE, CSM by CSM basis by hooking into the various systems that they use to do their jobs, by various APIs, instrumenting that activity, and then also just continuously monitoring that using just like anomaly detection in order to see like, okay, cool, how is this rep doing as compared to themselves historically? Or how is this rep doing as compared to the other people on his team? Is there a shortfall? If there is, statistically, well, let me know that as a sales manager, let me know that as a sales operations person so I can intervene rather than relying on me as a sales manager or a sales operations person to pore over that reporting in order to visually detect those anomalies. So what we realized was that like you could essentially create, sales operations analyst robot in a box, and it would be extraordinarily helpful because as a manager who maybe has 5 or 10 or 15 reps, depending on your sales motion, it's just, as a human, it's just not possible to monitor all of those various KPIs all the time because we've got lots of other things to do, like hiring and onboarding and dealing with the fact that so-and-so broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend or what have you. And so just, having something that is continuously monitoring these KPIs ends up being extremely helpful. And so we ended up raising money for the company in 2016. And, I've been working on it since and are blessed to have a lot of really amazing customers getting a lot of success out of the product.
What you see, I'm sure that there's some kind of analysis happening on the back end that tells you broad sales trends. When you look at broad sales behavior and areas where across all of your different clients or just based on your experience, sellers seem to be falling short, what are the common areas that most frequently are pitfalls for sales organizations?
Yeah. So the reality is that it ends up being that there are, dozens and dozens and dozens of like particular pathologies that like will show up injuring a rep, right? So unfortunately, there is no silver bullet, right? Which is why monitoring all this stuff in order to understand, like, oh, your problem is that your pipeline management is really bad, as indicated by the fact that you have wildly more untouched opportunities, or because the days between touches on your ops is much higher than all of your peers. Okay, why is that? Right? Do you not have enough time on your calendar to do adequate pipeline management or what have you? So that would be the problem for, Bobby, the rep over here. But then the problem for like, Susie, the rep over here might just be low activity. Like, hey, you're having 5 meetings a week. That's not good because everybody else is having 15, right? And so it just turns out that most of the time, every rep's kind of key improvement area ends up being different on a rep by rep basis. Obviously, they can cluster. And so this is kind of the challenge of being a manager or being a sales operations person. It's like, first, you have to identify what the problem is, right? Detect it. Then you have to diagnose, okay, what is the root cause of why this SDR's opportunity creation pace is so much lower than everybody else? And then once you identify, form a hypothesis of what the root cause is, then you have to coach around and say, okay, we need to resolve this because you're not multi-threading enough into these organizations. You see how all of your peers are interacting with 4 contacts in each of their account, and here you are at 2. Really, when you're prospecting, in Sales Navigator or Discover or what have you, I need you to take the extra effort in order to put more decision makers into your queue to execute against, because you can see right here, this is your shortfall. So unfortunately, there is no silver bullet, but if you could choose only one, then usually what it is it's just broadly, are you doing enough work? Which is like is that unsexy answer, but it just turns out that that is the truth, right? That like, top performing reps just do a lot more work. They're usually, they're having more meetings. They're touching their ops more frequently. You look at on a week by week basis how many ops they're interacting with, how many meetings they're having, how many other ops are progressing, and it is outperforming as compared to other people, which kind of flies in the face of, I think, a lot of, especially kind of older school sales leadership like to lionize this notion of sales as this like mysterious art where if I just say the right word at the right time, the right magical incantation, like the deal will magically close. Whereas the reality is like you just have to be doing lots and lots and lots of work because there's lots of variation, and like every op has the capacity to fail in different ways. So you hedge yourself by engaging in many ops concurrently. And so the best reps are doing that, and as a result engaging in a high level of activity in order to run many ops concurrently. But at the same time, not overloading themselves such that they're not spending good time with their good ops. So yeah, turns out people who do more work have more success. Weird.
I hear you. This episode of the Sales Hacker podcast is brought to you by DocuSign. Every sales org feels the pressure to close deals faster. Take control with the DocuSign Agreement Cloud, a suite of tools that automate sales contracts and quotes all in your CRM. Create custom contracts, get them signed, and pull data back into your opportunities. See why more than 500,000 businesses use DocuSign with a free trial and discount exclusively for Sales Hacker listeners. Go to go.docusign.com/saleshacker for more information. Our second sponsor is Outreach, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach supports sales reps by enabling them to humanize their communications at scale, from automating the soul-sucking manual work that eats up selling time to providing action-oriented tips on what communications are working best. Outreach has your back. And now, back to the show. I have a question. So what's your fundamental view of human nature? And what I mean by that is, I think the premise of Atrium, right, is that people are coachable and changeable. Do you think that there's an ideal hiring profile for a salesperson? Are you more kind of optimistic about coachability and think that, you don't have to have been a D2 college athlete. You can kind of come from any background. Yeah. Like when you think about the qualities that make a great salesperson that are fundamental to them beyond some of the coaching attributes that emerge from the technology, what are the things that you've observed?
Yeah, I think there are certainly characteristics that there are repeated characteristics that will lead to a high performing sales reps. I think you're right. Like traditionally those that when you're looking for those things, a historical like signifier that has been like a very easy like rule of thumb is like, oh, okay, competitive athlete by background, and that's not wrong, right? But it's just not the only signifier of that. Like, so I'll give you an example of this. So one of our SDRs over here, she went to UC San Diego undergrad. She was a competitive. She did competitive sports, but she was a fencer, right? So you don't necessarily go shopping on the fencing team for really badass SDRs, right? Or at least you initially think of that. But she's fantastic, right? So but essentially what you're looking for is coachability, the ability to follow a playbook, take feedback when there's a divergence from that playbook, and then remediate that, an ability to engage in a high level of activity. So which again is like practice or what have you, and curiosity, because what you need them to be able to do is problem solve, right? So whether it's an SDR or an AE, so much of selling is kind of navigating a maze. And so what you need to be able to do is constantly thinking like, okay, what is the next appropriate action here? Why is that? And so you need somebody who's curious and thoughtful in order to do that. So, and whereas traditionally, like, yeah, okay, let's go shopping in Greek organizations or in traditional team sports environments for these different colleges. Well, there's other places where those characteristics are trained on. And there's great organizations like SV Academy, who's doing a really good job of pulling people out of a less traditional sales feeder background and then training them up on how to be an SDR so they can hit the ground running. So like finding those raw characteristics in non-traditional places giving them tooling to be successful, and then dropping them into organizations like Atrium so they can hit the ground running.
I love it. Makes a lot of sense. You have a lot of opinions, as I do. And I'm wondering, as we look at these are such broad, flat things that you see in the modern, you run the community, Modern Sales Pros. Are there things that you see in modern selling that you think are missing the point, or just irritate you or piss you off? Are there behaviors of modern sellers or modern sales organizations when you think about, hey, I want to deliver a great buying experience for my customer, and you see that not happening? What is it that's not happening? What are your pet peeves around kind of modern sales techniques?
I think there's probably two major pet peeves. Would be, one is like a predilection on like the next great like magical software thing that's gonna magically solve your ills, and like looking for something like a magical technical solve to make up for the fact that you're just not doing core fundamentals right. Like, oh wow, I really need to adopt this crazy pants AI, forecasting, blah 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 blah, and it's like, oh okay, cool. Well, how do you do pipe reviews right now? Oh, we don't. Oh, okay. Well, why don't we start doing pipe reviews as a meeting? Let me introduce you to my friend. It's called a recurring meeting invite. And let's just do that first, and let's see what happens, right? So I think that there's that, and obviously there's an economic incentive for this, because I think a lot of us are in the sales world, are selling new innovative products. So we would like a rising tide to lift all boats, right? And like the proliferation of the sales stack actually is a good thing, but at the appropriate time, right? At the appropriate time and appropriate maturity. So looking for some sort of magical technical solution to solve the fact that you're not just doing some sort of basic core fundamentals correctly. Like, cool. How do you do, like, tell me how you do your metrics review in your team meeting right now. Oh, what do you mean? What's a team meeting? Oh my God. Right. So I think that's one pet peeve. And the second pet peeve is, I think is probably premature scale, which is, it's kind of a different variant of problem one, which is I see a lot of organizations, because as a result of Atrium, right, we're hooked into hundreds of organizations' sales performance data, and so you end up seeing some ostensibly like high flying companies that have raised millions and millions and millions and millions, dozens of millions of dollars, and are like way, 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 way out over their skis, because their sales motion is not solidified and repeatable. Right. And so what ends up happening there is like bad things happen as a result. Like maybe you're faking it till you make it, and like you catch up with yourself eventually. That's usually less the common case, versus like, eventually that you're gonna have to pay the piper. And so I think that that's something that in modern sale, and like in our modern selling environment, you see a lot of organizations getting like juiced up on venture capital, and before their sales organization is ready to actually go from 2 to 6 to to 10 to 20, what have you. So I think that's just another thing that I see quite a bit of. And the reason, and if it's just a self-inflicted wound and like it's bad for their shareholders or what have you, that would be one thing. But I think the other thing that's like really problematic for the community is people are looking at this from the outside saying like, oh, that organization is very successful based on these external signifiers that are potentially invalid. I will behave like them. And then they end up in the same trap. So like that's the thing that's really problematic, is essentially getting like led astray and then suffering the same fate. That is like a really big pet peeve, because essentially what you're doing is like you're polluting the information environment, if you will, right? You're like the Russian troll farms, but for sales, right? Where you're peddling erroneous advice, and eventually lo and behold, that company craters. But all along the way, you've been peddling erroneous advice to people who have then been deploying that in their own organizations and creating problems there.
One of the sometimes these companies are following playbooks that their board of directors, driven by venture capital investors, is sort of providing to them. What's your view on, the role of venture capital within all of this focus on hypergrowth, and do you have any advice for founders beyond selling motion on how they should partner with investors and when they should partner with investors to avoid some of this premature scaling?
Yeah. So I think the number one weapon there is just expertise, right? Which I guess goes back to the founder-led selling. So if you know how sales works as a founder, because you've done it yourself, and you've then added a couple other people and you've seen it happening, it's very difficult for someone to say, well, actually, I think you should approach it this way right here, and you should add 15 salespeople, and it'll be okay. Because at least now you have the primitives to be like, well, wait a minute, I just did this. And I knew how much work it was in order to fill the pipelines of these AEs right here. So now that I'm thinking ahead and saying we're gonna hire 20 account executives, 5 per quarter, that actually feels like maybe that's not attainable. Right, because you're armed with knowledge. So I think the first thing is to arm yourself with knowledge so you can actually have a peer conversation with those folks. Also, if you think about where a lot of VCs and board members come from, they don't come from a sales background, right? So you potentially have a situation of the blind leading the blind, which is, that's not always the case. But just understanding, having first principles and having those fundamentals nailed allows you to understand, okay, is this a good plan? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that one of the really neat things about sales, being great at sales, is that customer financing is a really powerful thing, right? So you look at some of these great sales organizations where they didn't actually have to raise a ton of money. So Qualtrics is a great example of a company who I hold out as an amazing sales organization, where for the longest time they didn't have to raise a lot of capital because they did they ran an excellent sales organization out of nearby Salt Lake City, and they were able to acquire lots of revenue at a good contribution margin and a good cost of sale. Eventually, they raised a very large round for expansion. But in the meantime, they were building enterprise value in the organization without diluting themselves. Indeed is another good example of this, where Indeed was acquired by Recruit, having for $1 billion, 5 years ago or 6 years ago or whatever. They only raised $5 million ahead of that.
And some of it was from Union Square. USV is just one of the better. It's just crazy that USV was in the Indeed deal among every other deal that we've heard about in that era of the internet.
Yeah, for sure. But so that's an amazing, because Indeed was able to be go-to-market excellent, and because Qualtrics was able to be go-to-market excellent, they were able to raise less money, right? So everybody's stock was worth way, 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 way more, including Union Square Ventures, but also all the founders and all the employees at Indeed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's it turns out the better and better that you can be at go-to-market, good things happen, right? But it all kind of starts from nailing that. It all stacks on itself. So nailing that sales motion initially, right, such that it's tight and repeatable and documented, and then proving that you can shove it into the brain of an incremental hire and have them come up to speed quickly and them have success. Well, now once you've done that, you have a money machine. You have the ability to add incremental humans who then start throwing off money. Well, now you that's magic. But the opposite of that, of course, is scaling out before you have that done. And instead of having a tight money machine, instead what you have is a large scale cost machine of inefficient reps. So it's kind of, which of those would you rather have? I would probably rather have the former one, right? But that requires being sales excellent.
I want a magic money machine personally. So I'm going to pick the former too. Pete, we are essentially out of time. So if we want to pay it forward a little bit, let's give a plug to MSP really quickly. Tell us what that is. That can be a way that sort of people continue to follow the conversation if they are salespeople. Give us the quick blurb for MSP and where they should go if they want to apply to join.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so I run a community for sales operations, enablement leadership folks called Modern Sales. It's a peer education community that consists of regional events and every major geography and an online forum that really just kind of focuses around questions and answers around modern sales excellence. So yeah, you can check it out. Just go to modernsaleshq.com. That's that's our website. You can find it on LinkedIn as well. There's a sign up form, et cetera, et cetera. It's very much focused on kind of like operational heavy, kind of like sales nerdery, but it's a great place to get many of the problems that you have right now have been solved by somebody else. So if you can just ask a 13,000 person community, like, hey, I have this problem, how have you solved it before? And then have a bunch of practitioners answer that for you. It can accelerate your solution of those problems.
Awesome. And if folks want to reach out to you directly, maybe they want to purchase Atrium, maybe they have a question for you, are you okay with that? And if so, what's the way that they can get into whatever inbox you're managing? What's the contact information?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm the only Peter Kazanjy in the United States. So you can just find me on LinkedIn. Just Google Peter Kazanjy. I'm pretty SEO'd. But or hit me up at pete@atriumhq.com.
I hate you for many reasons, but one of them is because Sam Jacobs, I think there's like 200 Sam Jacobs just in the New York tri-state area. So I am the opposite of SEO, which is a good lesson. When you name your children, everybody, make sure that they SEO very, very well. Pete Kazanjy is a great one. Pete, thanks so much for being on the show. Congrats on all the success. We love it. If you want to read Pete's book, which is open source, go to foundingsales.com.
Yep.
Awesome. And then we'll talk to you. We'll talk to you for Friday Fundamentals.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Pete. Hey everybody, it's Sam's Corner. Great conversation with Pete Kazanjy, good friend, and really insightful on how to grow a company and how to grow a company using sales from a very early stage to what we would define as scalability. And I think there's a couple things that he talked about. One of them is just your ability, if you're the founder, but let's say you're even just an early employee, something can be scalable when you take somebody that does not have the domain expertise or the problem space expertise, as Pete called it, and you can teach that person how to talk to your customers about the solution that you have related to the problems that they have. Your ability to teach other people is fundamentally what is going to enable your sales organization to scale. That's what training and onboarding, all of that stuff is. Can you teach other people that are not you, that do not have your background or expertise? Can you teach them to do the thing that you yourself have done as the early employee or founder? If you can, then you've got something on your hands. And if you can't, then that's a different problem. The other thing that Pete mentioned that I just think is worth reflecting on is so many times, and a lot of folks have talked about this, Jake Dunlap has talked about this, using technology when really what you're not doing are the basics. And Pete's example was people trying to use all kinds of different forecasting platforms when they're not running pipeline review meetings. So if you're not doing the basics of having conversations with your sales team about their deals and using Socratic questioning to help uncover problem spots in their thinking, shortcuts in their thinking, areas where they might improve, if you're not doing those things, there's not really a piece of technology that you can employ that will make it better. Technology, fundamentally, beyond even sales, is about the automation of process. It is about repeating things that humans used to do and doing those things more quickly and more efficiently. But if you're not doing any of those things in the first place, there's nothing to repeat. So you have to be mindful of that. You have to get, in the cooking world, they call it your salt and pepper, right? The basic seasoning of the food. You have to get the basics down, the fundamentals of how to sell, how to teach other people how to sell, and how to have conversations about the different conversations they are having, which are pipeline reviews. If you're doing those things, you can begin to layer in technology. But if you're not doing those things, technology really isn't going to help you. So something to think about. Really good episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Before we go, we want to thank our sponsors. We've got two sponsors. The first is DocuSign. Every sales org feels the pressure to close deals faster. Take control with the DocuSign Agreement Cloud, a suite of tools that automate sales contracts and quotes, all in your CRM. create custom contracts, get them signed, and pull data back into your opportunities. See why more than 500,000 businesses use DocuSign with a free trial and discount exclusively for Sales Hacker listeners at go.docusign.com/saleshacker. Second sponsor, of course, is Outreach. Outreach supports sales reps by enabling them to humanize communications at scale, from automating the soul-sucking manual work that eats up selling time to providing action-oriented tips on what communications are working best. Outreach has your back. If you want to reach me, you can. It's linkedin.com/in/Sam F. Jacobs. If you wanted to rate the show, please give us 5 stars on iTunes. Otherwise, I'll talk to you next time.